Welcome to this webinar. I'm going to talk a bit about how you can prepare for STEP. I'm going to give you some email addresses that might be useful if you have any issues. And we're going to have quite a lot of time for questions and answers at the end. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing screen for a second and ask my mentors to come in. So we've got 3 mentors with us today who will also be helping to answer your questions. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So Amy, would you like to go first?
Yep, I'm Amy. I'm a second year doing maths at Fitzwilliam College, and my first experience of STEP was when I was bored in lockdown in year 11 and looked at STEP questions and went, boy, these are hard.
Thank you. Vishal, you are our most experienced mentor, having done this for about 4 years now, sorry. Can you say a little bit about STEP?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Vishal, and yeah, I'm a 4th year. About STEP, I guess my first experience with it was my teacher gave me the C-class booklet, if you've heard of it. It's called like Advanced Problems in Mathematics, I think. And he just gave me that to work through during lessons. And I thought it was a pretty good introduction to STEP because it kind of like gave you a problem and like told you how to do it and like gave you hints towards it before you'd seen the solution.
Yeah, well, I'll show everybody where to find that booklet during the webinar. And Izzy.
Hi everyone, I'm Izzy. I'm also a second year at Fitzwilliam College. I think my first experience of STEP was probably doing STEP, like the very old STEP 1 questions.
Okay, thank you. So Henry, your mic is currently on, so I'm going to ask you to go first.
All right. I am Henry. I'm studying maths at St John's. I'm in my 2nd year.
And what was your first experience of a STEP question? Can you remember?
So I think I started towards the beginning of sixth form. And your kind of first look, you don't set a whole paper at that point, and your first look is, this seems implausibly difficult. It's, you definitely don't start it and are instantly really good at it. But it gets better, of course.
Thank you. Amy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Amy. I'm also a second year studying maths at Fitzwilliam College. My first experience of STEP was in the summer of year 11 when COVID meant we couldn't go anywhere and I was really bored. So I found a logic question about frogs and toads and had fun with that, and then looked at another STEP question and went, oh, they're not all nice problem solving like that.
Thank you. And Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm in my 2nd year studying maths at Mary Edwards. My first experience of STEP was, I think I first started looking at questions semi-seriously around the end of year 12. And I just did a few step 1 questions and they weren't too bad. And I thought it was going to be nice and it wasn't.
Okay, thank you very much. So okay, probably the most important thing to talk about at the beginning of this webinar are some email addresses. So we've got a couple of email addresses at the bottom. I'm just going to get an annotation tool so that I can draw on things. The email address that comes to the STEP support program is either of these 2. They both work. This one is probably actually the slightly more reliable one at the moment because we just changed our email system. But they did both at the moment, they both work. And those will go to me and I'll hopefully be able to answer questions or point you to somewhere where you can find out the answers. For anything to do with actually registering to sit STEP or about things like when you get your results and remarks and that sort of thing, then this is the OCR email address. I'll show you where you can find those from the STEP Support Programme website. Everything is linked on there. But those are the people that run the administration of STEP. So if you've got any questions about registering or access arrangements, we had somebody in the webinar yesterday asking about purple paper. Those are the people that you need to contact for that. We have I've called it Twitter, it probably ought to be X. We have an X account, which is at STEP Support Cam. On that account, I tend to tweet and post things like when STEP registration opens, reminders of when you need to register by. I will also tweet some other information. Hope some of you probably found out about this webinar from that. So if you don't already, then do follow us on X. I occasionally post pictures of dogs as well, in case you're into that sort of thing. I've talked a little bit about the webinar content. I've mentioned Q&A. We will be recording this webinar, and I will put either today's webinar or yesterday's webinar onto the STEP Support Programme website by the end of the week. But what I'll do is I'll mush together the Q&As, so we've got both sets of Q&As there at the end. Okay, let's get rid of those. A little bit about the exam to begin with. I will show you this website in a second. You need to register for STEP. There is a hard deadline by which you need to register by. So if you're used to A-levels, for A-levels, you can register, I think, up until the day before the actual exam. You might have to pay extra for a late entry, but you can still do that. With STEP, there is a hard deadline, which I think is the 1st of May, but I'll show you that date in a second. And you must have registered before that date. There are STEP specifications. We rewrote the specifications in 2019 to take into account the new A-level mathematics. Pre-2018, the papers are still very, very useful, but they won't quite match what is necessarily in the papers this year. If you look on the OCR website, it still says the 2023 specification. The specification has not changed. All that OCR needs to do is to change the front page so it says OCR. The paper, there are 12 questions. We've got 12 questions on each paper. 8 of them are pure questions. 2 of them are mechanics. And 2 of them are stats or probability. And to be honest with you, the vast majority of the statistics questions tend to lean towards the probability end of things, just because we can ask some slightly more interesting questions on that. You have to do, well, you don't have to do, but your mark is based on the 6 best questions. So theoretically, you can attempt as many questions as you like, but your mark will only depend on the 6 best. And we tend to find that those people who've attempted more than 7 don't tend to end up doing very well because they've just done the first bits of lots of questions rather than getting most of the way through a question. If you look back at very, very old STEP papers, so I'm talking mid-90s, you might find it says on the front page, you'll get extra credit for doing well on a question. That is no longer the case. Each question is marked out of 20. If you get 3/4 of the way through the question, you get 3/4 of the marks. There's no bonus marks for completing a question. That's no longer the case. It will say on the front page, you won't get many marks for fragmentary answers. What that means is if you do 10 questions and you do part A on all of them, you're probably not going to score very well. So concentrate on 6. The other thing I will say that in the past, we've sometimes seen written in old STEP advice that 4 questions is enough for grade 1. I'm going to show you some grade boundaries in a minute. That is not always the case. So my advice is always to attempt 6 questions, even if for a couple of them, you've only do the first bit, but always make sure you have a go at 6, but try and do 10. I'm going to show you the answer booklet and explain a little bit about how that works. And I will show a table of some grade boundaries and we'll talk about that. Okay, I was going to show you this website, so I'll do that now. So the OCR website, it is linked to from the STEP Support Programme website. So there's a link here. So everything I talk about is linked to from the STEP Support Programme website down the side. I think they are all useful links. This is the OCR STEP website. If you have visited the Cambridge Admissions Testing Service website last year, you'll notice that this looks almost identical. Even the pictures are the same. Basically, CAAT is part or was part of Cambridge Assessment, as is OCR. It's just moved basically from one department to another department. We've got some very important information here. We have the STEP specification. So it says, please note it is currently being prepared for 2024. There are no changes. All they need to do is get rid of this logo at the top and replace it with OCR. For the step specifications, I want to say a little bit about this. There are 3 sections. There's something called Mathematics 1, there's Step Mathematics 2, and Step Mathematics 3. Now, the reason for this is because when we changed the specification in 2019, there was still the Step 1 paper. So Mathematics 1 is basically the old Step 1 specification. Step 1 is based on A-level maths, and there's a lot of A-level, or all of A-level maths is consistent across the exam boards. It covers the same stuff. Step 2 is based on A-level maths and AS further maths, and step 3 is based on A-level maths and A-level further maths. Apologies if you're not doing A-levels, if you're doing IB or higher, this is what we have based the step specification on, but it does list everything, so you'll be able to see what you know and what you don't know. A quick note of caution, you might get questions in step 3, which are part of the Mathematics 1 specification. We don't have to ask you step 3 questions specifically on step 3 knowledge. We might ask you a question about vectors, which only uses stuff from step 1. So that is perfectly possible. So don't go into step 3 expecting to get lots of complex numbers and hyperbolic functions and matrices. You'll probably find that at least one of those questions does not actually rely on any of those topics. And sometimes you might get a question which is not explicitly in the specification, because the point of that question is to introduce you to a new idea in mathematics and then help you through it. So there's a step question somewhere on Fourier transforms, which is a university level of maths, but the step question explains it. You get to grips with the new material and then you apply it to the question. Quickly looking down the step specifications, you'll notice that some bits are in bold italics. Now, these are bits which are not in the standard A-level. So for step 1, proof by induction is not covered in A-level single maths. It's part of further maths, but it's not part of A-level single maths. So we've highlighted that in bold and italics to indicate that this is something that you might not have covered. When we get down to step 2, things get a little bit more different, because in step 2, it's based on AS further maths, for which there is a lot more variation. So there is some content that all exam boards have to use, but there's also more choice. So for further maths, you can choose to do mechanics modules, but maybe not statistics modules. So there's a lot more here that's in bold and italics, but you might have done it. So if I go all the way to mechanics, you'll notice that all the mechanics is in bold italics, because you don't have to do any mechanics as part of further maths. So the idea behind this is trying to alert you to some bits which you might not have covered, but you may well have done. I'm just going to say something very else quickly about the specification, and I'm hopefully also going to answer some of the pre-submitted questions as well at the same time. So at the back of the specification, you've got a section about notation and required formulae. So one of the things you might notice about step papers is they look a little bit different to A-level papers. And that's because they're formatted in something called LaTeX. All of my stuff on the STEP support program is also formatted in LaTeX. And sometimes it can look a little bit different to things which are written using a different typesetting program. We have lists of all the notation that you are expected to know. So you don't very often see set notation in step questions, but theoretically it could be there. You might see things like N or Z or R to represent natural numbers or integers or real numbers. So this is just all the list of the notation we might use that we expect you to know. Need that one. So there's quite a lot of notation here. Most of it you probably already know. There's a few possible funny ones, like the product symbol, which you might not have met before. But all this means is that instead of summing the terms A1, A2, you're multiplying the terms together. If that was in a question, I'd expect that the step question would explain what this means. Yep, so lots and lots of notation. And hopefully in a minute, I'm going to get to the required formulae. So we had a couple of questions about formula booklets. There are no formula booklets for STEP anymore. This is a list of formulae that we expect you to know. We also expect you sometimes to be able to derive other formulae from these formulae if they're fairly simple to do so. So you might substitute an angle of pi over 2 minus theta to turn a cos into a sine and that sort of thing. So that there are lots and lots of formulae here. These ones that we expect you to know. Sometimes in a STEP question, we might decide that we don't want you to spend time deriving it, or perhaps we don't want you to have to try and remember it. We will sometimes give you a formula in a question. So, for example, perhaps there's a question that requires you to differentiate sinh or sinh minus 1, and we don't necessarily want you to spend the time doing that, so we might give you that formula in the question. So you might have a question that says, you may assume the result splat, just to help you along. And in some ways that's quite nice because you don't have to remember and go back through the formula booklet. If it's a formula we think is going to be very, very useful, then we will give it to you in the question. Okay, so that's everything I want to say about the specification. As I say, the 2023 one, if you notice, for some reason the tab says 2022, it hasn't changed very much at all since 2019, and it hasn't changed at all since 2023. So that is still relevant. Key dates and fees, because these are very, very important. We have a nice little timeline here, which is a nice addition that OCR have given us. The 1st of March is when registration opens. So from the 1st of March, your school can register you. If your school is not yet registered to deliver OCR exams, then the school might have to register. I think if that's the case, then talk to the exams officer at your school, and they will be able to contact OCR and get that sorted. There's a deadline for modified question papers. So if you're a person that needs A3 papers or stuff printed on purple paper or something else, then that's a deadline. Again, talk to the exams officer at your school or at your college, and make them aware. They probably are already, but just make sure that they're aware. I think I said the 1st of May for registration closes. It's actually the 4th of May. So that is the deadline. Then you can see the step dates at the bottom. We've got the 5th of June and the 24th of June. I'm going to try and preempt a question here. You may find that step clashes with one of your other exams. If that's the case, then you might be put into isolation at lunchtime. So say you had step and a philosophy exam in the morning, then you might sit the step and then go into a room with nobody else, not allowed your mobile phone, and then sit the philosophy in the afternoon. It's a very common thing. Schools are very used to it. They will sort it out. If you are in the UK, then step will happen in the morning, unless you've got unless you have a clash. If you are elsewhere in the world, then the time at which step starts will depend a bit depending on where you are. We don't start step at 9 a.m. GMT if it means you're going to be sitting it at midnight wherever you are. We do take into account these things. There's a bit about fees at the bottom here. If fees are an issue for you, then I suggest that you contact the college that's given you an offer and see if there's any assistance that they can provide. We don't have a university-wide system for dealing with this. At Cambridge, admissions are dealt with by the colleges. So any issues in that respect, then talk to the college that has given you an offer. Couple more things. We've got a preparing for STEP page. This has got some links to some past papers. We've got the 2019 to 2023 papers. These are the ones that are based on the specification that's relevant to you. You can also find some of the other past papers at this button here. They only go back to about 2013. I'll show you in a second where you can find more of them. There are mark schemes from about 2013. There are not mark schemes to things like 1988, I'm afraid. You might be able to find solutions to them, but not an official mark scheme. Okay, there's a bit about scoring and results. I won't go into that now. And there's also a very helpful facts page. I won't talk about this now, but go and have a look at that, because you may well find that questions that you want answered are there. Okay, so it's a quick tour of the OCR website. There's the step maths at OCR email that I spoke about earlier, but they're the people that deal with all the administration of the papers, and they also organise the markers with a lot of input from the university as well. So I've talked about the format of the paper. I've given you a tour of that website. I'm going to show you what the front page of a STEP paper looks like. There will be a change for your year. This will not be there, and it will say OCR instead. But besides that, the front of the STEP paper should look exactly the same. A lot of this information I've already given you. I don't think I've actually told you that it's 3 hours long, but the paper is 3 hours long. There are 12 questions. Each question is marked out of 20, and you're advised to concentrate on no more than 6 questions. All your answers will be marked, but crossed out work will not be marked. So my advice for this is that if you have actually attempted questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, don't cross any of them out unless you're going to replace them. So you might think that you've done worse on question 7. If you cross out question 7, it won't get looked at. If you leave question 7, it will get marked, and you never know, you might actually get more marks for question 7. So if you've attempted a question, don't cross it out unless you are actually replacing it. If you have got lots of attempts and you haven't crossed out any, then what the marker will do is have a quick look through your solutions, try and work out which one is likely to get the most marks, and then mark that one. But then what the marker will not do is rigorously mark all 20 attempts and then give you the best mark. They will scan it. It looks like the third attempt is probably going to score the most. I'll mark that one. If there is a particular attempt that you definitely want the marker to mark, then I'll suggest you cross out the attempts you don't want them to mark. If you cross out an attempt and you change your mind, you can write next to it, crossed out in error, please mark this. And that has the effect of uncrossing it out. For that reason, if you cross it out, don't do this sort of thing. Just put a line through it. That's all you need to do. I've already said there is no mathematical formula booklet. Calculators are not permitted, so you can't use your calculator to help you with some of the algebra, I'm afraid. And bilingual dictionaries are not permitted. So if you're overseas, I'm afraid we don't allow bilingual dictionaries. Next page. This is what the answer booklet looks like. So you have a 48-page answer booklet. The first 2 pages, or possibly 3 pages, are for details. So it will have stuff about that you fill in with your name and everything else. Those pages get removed, and then the rest of the answer booklet gets scanned, but everything is barcoded, so it all hangs together with your details on the first page. So this means that the markers mark anonymously. They don't know whose script they are marking. When the markers are marking, they mark 1 question at a time. So you have a team of markers who all mark question 1, and a different team of markers all mark question 2. And in order to make sure that the right questions go to the right markers, we have a system where you have to fill in little circles. So if you look at this front page, we've got some stuff about that. I have filled in 1 circle at the top of every page. And I'll show you what the top of the page looks like. So for each page where you have attempted a question, you're meant to circle in which question it is. So if you have done question 1 for the first 3 pages, you circle in question 1 each time. I have started each answer on a new page. That's important because different pages go to different markers. Okay, so don't mix together question 2 and question 3 onto one page. I've crossed out all my rough work. I've talked about that. I've not removed any pages. Basically, don't rip out pages. I have not attached any extra sheets. You are not allowed rough paper in STEP. All of your working goes into this booklet. You might like to use the last few pages of the booklet to do some rough working on. You can write rough working at the top. That's absolutely fine. If you're doing rough working, you might not fill in the circles. That's absolutely fine. But you're not allowed to hand in extra sheets of paper. Every year we tend to have somebody who says, I have really, really big handwriting. How do I get extra paper? It's 44 sides of A4. Perhaps at some point just time yourself and see how long it takes you to fill a page of A4 with maths work. It's very unlikely you'll need 44 pages, or you'll be able to fill 44 pages in a whole 3 hours. If you have an access situation where perhaps you have really, really, really big handwriting, you might be able to apply for a second booklet through your school. That would be come under the same sort of thing as A3 size question papers. That request will have to be made by the 20th of April. But to be honest with you, most people don't use more than a quarter of the booklet. I have seen one person who used less than a page per question. So just filled out 6 pages. People don't fill these pages up. You have lots of paper, so don't panic about that. There's a declaration at the bottom to say that I understand that failure to follow the requirements on this page might mean some of my work is not marked. I'll pick up on that one in a second. And the last box at the bottom is, have I actually done all this? Tick. It's just a check. You can find these pages on the OCR website. You can click on a button. It will show you what these pages look like. So the answer booklet, that's what the inside page looks like. There's your little circles at the top. The mistakes that we see are people not filling in any circle. If that happens, then the system that scans the paper will create an alert saying, it looks like there's writing on this page, but there's no circle being filled in. Then it will ask a human to look at it and work out what's going on. We also sometimes get situations where people fill in the wrong circle. So perhaps they've answered question 2, but they've accidentally circled in question 3. If that's the case, then it will be sent to the question 3 markers, who will look at it and say, this is not question 3. And then they can reassign the question to the right people. Sometimes people do mix up 2 questions on the same page, even though we tell them not to. If that's the case, we have a system for reallocating. But all of these things create an extra opportunity for error. So it is in your best interests to try and make sure that you fill in these circles correctly, because that means that all the scripts get sent to the right person, and there will be fewer mistakes. Okay, so that's a bit about the exam paper and how it is run. I've already said that. These are the grey boundaries. I've already said that each step question is marked out of 20. So for those of you who are quite quick at maths, that's a maximum of 120. If you have a look at the boundaries, they do move about quite a bit. If you only did 4 questions, then you better hope that if you're in 2017 taking step 2, you got those 4 questions completely correct. And this is one of these reasons why I say always make sure you attempt 6 questions, even if the other 2 are only little bits, because then you'll pick up a few marks from there, which will help counterbalance maybe losing a few marks on the other questions. You'll notice that most of the time, pre-20, or I say most of the time, but pre-2020, step 2 usually had a higher grade 1 boundary compared to step 3. This is something we'd probably like to try and get back up to at some point. But for now, the step 2 boundary does seem to have slipped a bit. You'll notice 2020 was a very strange year where we had a very, very low step 2 boundary. We think that's because in 2020, step 2 was it was an odd year for many reasons, but step was the only exam paper that ran, and it ran in people's homes, and they're being watched through webcams as invigilation. And we think that was quite off-putting, and that meant people underperformed in step 2 quite drastically. By step 3, they got a bit more used to it, which is why that step boundary is higher. That's what we think went on. Okay, going to quickly talk a bit about how to prepare, and then we'll move on to Q&A. So the STEP support program, there is lots of stuff on there. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of some of the things that we have. You'll notice it's nice and purple. Last year it was grey, which was a bit horrible, but we've managed to work out how to change the colour. I might change it again at some point just for fun. I've already mentioned that there is a whole load of useful links down the side. The STEP question database, this is a place where you can find all of the STEP papers. So if you want to find 1998, then this will then sort out all the 1998 questions. You can click on it, and then at the bottom here, you can download a PDF of that question. You can also, if you want to, download the LaTeX file. One of the things I will say is that there are some errors in these papers, not many, but a lot of the very old papers were re-LaTeXed for the STEP database. And as always, there are sometimes errors that creep in. So occasionally you might find a question that's not quite correct. If you get that one of those situations and you're not quite sure, do feel free to email me. My summer job this year is going to be to correct all of these, which will be fun. You can also search for questions on a particular topic. If you want to go home, you are home. But if you want to tonight, I suggest you maybe look for penguins, which is a nice question. Horse is quite a nice question. And photographs is quite a fun question. But besides that, you can search for things like number theory or curve sketching and get some questions based around a particular topic. Other things which are quite useful at this point, this link here takes you to the book that Vishal mentioned. So this is written by Stephen Siklos. Stephen ran STEP from 1987 to 2019 when he very sadly died. So he was basically Mr. STEP or Dr. STEP for 30 years, and he wrote a lot of the STEP questions himself. And this book takes STEP questions, breaks them down, sometimes talks a little bit about the background behind them or the ideas that inspired them. And it's a really nice way to get into STEP, especially if you're in year 12 at the moment. Some of the other links, there's the OCR exam board link. So you don't need to remember. I've got the link there for you. So MEI have got worked solutions to STEP papers from, I think, 1996. So you just access them as a guest. STEP past paper work solutions. So yeah, 1996 up to the current day. So let's see, how is 2023 there? Oh, not quite up to the current day. But this is one of the things that I said about once you've worked through a question, have a look at somebody else's solution to it, because you might learn something. So I'll just click on one at random, question 1, and you'll see a work solution. They're all handwritten. Sometimes they might be slightly hard to follow, but that's an option there for you to have a look at these other solutions and compare that method to the one that you might have done. One of the things I would advise when you've worked through a question is have a look at the examiner's report if it's available, have a look at the mark scheme if it's available, but also try and find other solutions to compare your answer to, because it might be that somebody else has done a different method, which might have been more efficient than yours, or might have been less efficient. But it's really nice to compare different solutions and to give you a few more tools that you can use. What else shall I say about this? There's foundation modules. These are really good if you are in year 12 to get you into STEP more gradually. We also have step 2 and step 3 modules, which are aimed at those areas of the specification. Some of the things you might find quite useful is in each module, we've got a list of topic notes. So these are just brief things that you need to know. There'll be a lot of the step 1 specification in there as well. It's kind of, I sometimes call them a crib sheet, but it's a list of all the things you need to know in order to do these questions. For each of these modules, we have some questions, some step questions. We have some hints. So if you get stuck, you can use a hint to help you through. And then we have solutions. Other things that might be useful are worked papers. So every year, every time we do these webinars, we get questions about timed papers. I would not try and do 20 years worth of timed papers. Firstly, that's just far too many. Secondly, if you do a timed paper, quite often people only then look at 6 questions, which means that you have wasted half the paper, if you like. So I would probably not do more than 2 or maybe 3 years of past papers, but of timed past papers. But for your timed past papers, I would try and make sure that you do the more recent ones. 2023 will be up in about a month's time. I'm working on it slowly. It takes a long time. These are about 50 pages long. So they are very long documents. For each one, I've got the step question. I've got the examiner's report in there, so you can see what people did well, what people did less well generally. And then there is a long solution. I've also got bits in blue, which are sort of notes and comments. Your solutions are not expected to be as complete as these. I've put in as many steps as I possibly can. Yours are probably going to be a bit shorter, but I wanted to explain every single step. So they are very long solutions. They're a really good thing to use after you've gone through a past paper. Something else which is quite useful is we have down here specifications and specification support. So I have created a specification mapping document. This is a few years old now, but doesn't not much has changed in the specifications. And what this does is it indicates how the pre-2019 specification maps up to the new one. So this is all the current specification, and everything which is in blue was on the old step 1, step 2 papers. And then as you go through, there's a few bits which are new additions. So that's the things that won't be in the old papers. You'll notice that a lot of the matrices, I've put new addition to step. Matrices were in step in the early 90s, then they disappeared, and then they came back again for 2019. So that's why they're down as being new. So one of the most useful modules that you might find are the matrices modules, where we have found some step-like questions. So these aren't step questions because there aren't many old step questions, but these are ones which are sort of step-ish, just to give you a bit of practice. The other thing that we have under specifications and specification support are some notes about areas of the specification. So these are especially the bits that were in bold italics that I mentioned earlier, but these are just going through some of the bits of specification, giving some examples, sometimes connecting you to other resources. So for example, necessary and sufficient conditions is something which we have in step, or if and only if as well. And in that I have indicated some places where you can find extra help on those topics. So that is, well, there's loads and loads of stuff on the STEP Support Programme website. So if you haven't had a good look around, have a look around, familiarize yourself with what's out there. And, you know, we have lots of stuff. Let's refine my presentation, which is here. So I've already said with time papers, don't do too many. I would also say probably don't do them yet. Save them for a bit later. I imagine we'll have some Q&A about them as well, because we normally do. I've talked a bit about mark schemes. Don't forget the examiner's reports as well. So they can be really useful to indicate common issues with questions. And also they can help you feel quite good if you didn't fall into a trap that lots of people did. Okay, last 5 minutes and then we'll go on to Q&A. I'm going to give a very few exam tips. One is, in the words of Douglas Adams, don't panic. That is very much easier said than done. But best way to not panic is to do lots and lots of practice. So the more you get used to step questions and the more you get used to being stuck and having to get unstuck, then the more confident you'll be that when you get stuck in an exam, that you've had experience with this and that hopefully you will get unstuck. The other thing you can do, it's a long 3-hour exam. If you find in the middle of the exam you're starting to get a bit panicky, you can ask to go to the toilet, so you can get up, go to the toilet, splash some water in your face, but just get up and move around and then go back into the exam room. But you can lose maybe 3 minutes like that, and it just sort of stops you sitting there panicking, gives you a bit of movement, which will hopefully help. STEP has a lot of algebra in it, so I've put be prepared for a lot of algebra, especially mechanics questions. They quite often have lots of equations that you then need to manipulate and show something. When I used to be a teacher, I always used to say to my year 8s, 1 equal sign per line, all the equal signs aligned. And if you look at my work solutions, you'll often find little equal signs going all the way down. That sort of thing just helps you keep track of what you're doing and make sure that you're not losing things line on line. Don't do blah equals blah equals blah equals blah all on one line, because that's going to go horribly wrong. The other thing that's really useful to do is to label your equations. So you might want to label them 1, 2, 3. You can label them star, dagger. I don't know, you could draw a picture of a cat, whatever you like. If you label your equations, it can help you when you're going through your solution. You can say things like substitute 1 into 2, or 2 implies. You can do 2 lots of 1 plus 3 lots of 2, and this sort of thing. And it really helps make your method clear and also helps you to keep track of what you're doing. Another thing that's really important is to make sure that you can read your own handwriting. There's a brilliant example, I think it's 2010 step 1 examiner's report. There's a little picture there of a student's handwriting where the M, the little m, the big M and the mu are almost completely indistinguishable. Apparently they went on to get the question right. I'm not quite sure how the examiner worked that out. But be really careful that you can read your own handwriting. And there's a bit of a nasty habit of having little m and big M. So just be really careful of those. The other thing I found when I was in my first year at university is I spent a page of writing trying to get something out which involved 2s and Zs. And halfway down the page, I misread one of my 2s and Zs. Since then, I always write Z like this. But just be careful, make sure you can read your own handwriting. Because if you can't, I'm not sure you can expect your examiners to either. 2 more tips, and then we'll get on to the Q&A. It's a 3-hour exam. That's 180 minutes. It's a long time. You can spend 5 minutes at the start reading through the questions. So just pause, read through all the questions. Hopefully it'll help stop you panicking as well. But there's plenty of time for you to do that. And the last thing is question 1. So you might have heard that question 1 is the easy question. That's not the intention. The intention is that question 1 is accessible. Apologies if I spelled this wrong. the idea is that question 1 is a question that people should be able to look at and be able to get started with. It's not that it's supposed to be easier, it's supposed to be the same level of difficulty as the other questions, but you should be able to get stuck into it and start working on it fairly straight away. You might find that there's quite a lot of algebra you need to keep track of, which increases the difficulty in that respect. So you might know what you've got to do, but the actual techniques of doing it might be difficult. Don't feel you have to do question 1. If you look at question 1 and it really doesn't float your boat, then feel free to do a different question. It's supposed to be accessible, doesn't mean that everyone's going to want to do it. In a similar way, we probably wouldn't make a vectors question 1, because we know that a lot of people don't like vectors. It's probably going to be something slightly more mainstream. I will just at this point mention vectors, because I know lots of people don't like vector step questions. I would at this point still practice vector step questions, because if you get to Cambridge, you'll find that 25% of your courses in the first 2 terms have the word vectors in the title. So you will have to do some vector work. I don't care when you do your exam whether or not you do a vectors question in the real exam, but do some preparation beforehand, because preparing for STEP is not just about preparing to actually sit the exam. It's also about preparing for doing maths at university. So, okay, here's a question that I was kind of expecting. In terms of timing, when should we start doing timed papers? Mentors, when did you start doing timed papers? If you can remember.
End of the Easter holidays, start of the beginning of Easter term, roughly. Just did 1 a week, and then a couple more closer to the exams.
So about 2 months from now, I think. Izzy, can you remember?
Yeah, just checking. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's good.
I didn't do many, to be honest. So probably like less than a month before the exam. The first few I did, I kind of like panicked quite a lot, to be honest, because all of my practice so far had been, you know, sitting down with a question and doing every single part. You know, even if it took me like an hour to do the question, I'd do every single part. And then I'd get into the exam and I'd try to do every single part of a question. And then I'd get like 3 questions done in 3 hours, and then I'd panic. So I'd say like, you don't need to do loads of practice papers, but just do enough so that you're kind of comfortable with the exam style of kind of working through questions for like less amount of time is what I'd say.
Vishal, I know it was a long time ago, but can you remember when you started doing time papers?
So when I did STEP, it was lockdown, and I think for me that meant that I had like a fairly different way of preparing. I guess I did a time paper and then would do the questions in the evening after, because I didn't have school. I could just do that. But yeah, I think if I did STEP in like normal conditions, I'd probably do it like probably do time papers later on, like maybe like May or so, or the end of April.
Yeah. Ideally, you want to have done lots of STEP questions before you start putting yourself under the time pressure.
Yeah.
So the idea of doing the time papers is to get used to the idea of choosing questions. And you don't need many years in which to do that. The other thing I'll say is really important is to make sure once you've done a time paper, you do then go and look at the other questions. Don't ditch them completely, even if some of them are vectors questions. I'm going to keep mentioning vectors. Somebody's asked, how long should you spend choosing questions, and how would you do it?
So I would probably do, I think this is what you suggested, Clara, doing like 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of the exam. I'd go through, read them all, and then give them a rating out of 10 based on how easy I felt that they would be, and like what would kind of play to my strengths, like the topics that I liked to do. And then after that, you can kind of have a strategy of choosing it. So you might want to like start off with the highest ranking, so something quite easy to kind of get you going. And then after that, you might want to do something a bit more challenging, But it's kind of up to you the order in which you do them. But I think having like the ranking system is really nice because you have the time to go through and make like a proper decision about what you want to do with a question without having to reread it like 100 times every time you want to move on from another question.
Yeah, so I've heard this strategy before, but going through and giving every question a mark out of 10, and then going doing all the 10s, then maybe all the 9s and so on. I think most years the most common combination of questions is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tends to be the most popular, unless there is a vectors question before question 6, in which case it tends to skew the results a bit. Most years mechanics and stats questions are not that popular. But generally speaking, those people who attempt one normally do quite well at it. Anyone else got any strategies for choosing questions?
I went through, read them all, and I give them a star or a cross, and the number of bars on the star was how much I liked it, and if it was a cross, it meant I will never attempt this in an exam. And that really helped because halfway through step 3, like it wasn't going my way. I was really stressed. I was really panicked. And I was like, you know what? Let's just drop every question I've started that's not working. Let's find the next ranked ones. And the next ranked ones for me were the mechanics ones. And I managed to do both of the mechanics questions together in 20 minutes because I was on adrenaline. Oh my gosh, I really want to go to Cambridge and I'm currently not going to get in. Killed my arm doing it. It really hurt. It was quite painful. But in the end, you know, I got there. And one great tip that I only remember now from doing that was I did loads of arithmetic. I got to the end of the algebra and I went, oh no, it says show that this equals this and I haven't showed this. But what you can do there is just go, I should have got this, and then continue as though you have, and you won't lose the marks for the second half. You'll only lose the marks for wherever in the mess of algebra something's gone slightly wrong, which probably saved my mark in that one.
Yeah, so if we have a question which asks you to show that somewhere in the middle, that's meant to be a kindness so that you can then do the rest of the question even if something goes wrong further on. Otherwise you just get completely stuck. It's absolutely fine if you messed up the bit in the middle, you can still do the rest. Just quick checking through the questions. How are STEP results shared with non-Cambridge universities like Imperial? Is it like Tamura where we go to a website and choose which unis to send it to? No, it isn't. I think STEP results just come out at the same time as UCAS and will go to the universities at the same time. Somebody said, what is it about vectors questions that makes them so disliked? Anyone got any ideas?
I think the vectors questions in STEP are more similar to the vectors that you do at university, where it's more like kind of algebra. Whereas I found like at A level, it tends to be very numerical. If that makes sense. Like
yeah, that does make sense.
A equals 1420 or something like that. So I think it's kind of just a bit of a leap for people, but like if you're interested in vectors, like feel free to make the leap, you know.
Yeah, I quite often find the vectors questions some of the easier STEP questions in my respect, but that's because I supervise vectors in 1A of the Tripos, so I'm kind of used to them by now. I would say, you know, give them a go. If you don't like them in the exam, doesn't matter. So I think I'll answer that. Any other questions that Mensa want to pick up?
The vectors one as well, it's a different way of thinking. And if you're a state school student with an offer from Cambridge or Warwick, they both offer webinars, free webinars. And they were the ones that actually really helped me understand vector questions for STEP. I don't want to plug a different university, it seems really weird, but Warwick's course, they did, most of them were, you know, pretty average webinars, but the one on vectors just really helped me understand because I was taught the dot product at A level, but I wasn't taught what it actually meant geometrically. And they were able to plot it out. And it's like, oh, this is what I'm actually doing when I'm applying the formulae I've been taught. So if you get a chance to do those webinars for Cambridge, Warwick, I'm sure other places do them as well. I suggest you do them. They are really helpful.
I think we've got a bit in the specification support as well, which has got some explanation of what the dot product is doing. So do have a look at that as well. Somebody's asked a question about how does the system where an examiner scans through to look for high scoring questions coexist with different markers for each question. I think I perhaps didn't explain that quite well. What I meant was if you have several attempts at the same question, then the person marking that question will scan all of the attempts of that question and mark the highest score. So if you've got 20 attempts at question 1, the examiner for question 1 will scan them all and pick out the highest score. Each different question will get marked individually, and then the best 6 scores will make your final score. So if you've got marks of 12, 13 to, I can't do this off the top of my head, but basically all your questions get marked independently, and then the best 6 scores are what make up your final score. So I hope that answers that question. If it doesn't quite, do feel free to email me and I'll try and make that clearer. Someone said, what is contained within results inquiries? Have a look at the website, but sometimes, like with A levels, you can request somebody to look at your result if you don't think it's right. Most of the time, or marks in step very, 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 very rarely change. I think actual step grades almost never change. But you know, your exams officer at your school will have experience with that sort of thing. Okay. How likely is it that I could get into Cambridge even if I don't get the 1-1 I need? So every year about 170 people at Cambridge have got 1-1 or higher. That means that about 80 people have not got 1-1. So every year about a third of the people at Cambridge don't have the 1-1. I was one of those a long time ago. It doesn't mean that you can't still do very, very well in STEP. You know, sometimes perhaps just as questions weren't quite what you wanted and you got really close to a 1-1. So answer that question. Mentors, anything you want to pick up on?
Yeah, there's one about how important is working when the correct answer has been achieved. Really important. One, if you make a small error and you just put the answer down, they're going to have no idea where you've gone wrong and you'll get no marks. If you give a correct answer without the proof, yet again, you'll get probably 1 or 2 out of 20. Also, Cambridge get your papers. So if you slightly miss the step grades, they will be able to see what you did in your step exams. And obviously, if you've just made a small arithmetic mistake, you're more likely to get in than if you've made a maths error that shows you don't understand the maths. And if you don't have the workings there, then they're not going to be able to see which one of them it is.
Yeah, I'll add to that, you know, any question which asks you to show that, you need to put in enough steps of working to convince the examiner you have actually shown that and you haven't just written down what the answer is. Similarly for determine, you have to show the working. Does anyone else want to pick up on that? I am seeing some love for vectors as well, which is nice. Any other questions people want to pick up on? I think we're doing quite well. We've only got a couple left. I'll answer that question.
There was one about the algebra. So like in general, I'd say just do a lot of practice and you'll find the most natural ways to make sure that you don't make errors. That's something that I kind of noticed when I was doing A levels. Compared to my friends who did less maths, I would make less errors because obviously I still did make errors sometimes, but I had ways of writing down the maths that meant that my working was really clear, and it stops me making errors. So just stuff like you said, Claire, like putting 1 equal sign per line. Feel free to like use multiple lines. If you're doing like, say you've got a fraction, like space everything out, and feel free to skip the other side of the page. So if it makes it easier for you to like follow it, don't write anything on the other side of the page, just start on a new page and then you won't make a mistake copying out the next line. But yeah, I just find like the more practice you do, the more you'll find natural ways to avoid making errors in your algebra.
Yeah, and also have a look at the solutions I've got on the STEP Support Programme website. They've obviously been latex, so they look a bit nicer than what I would produce by hand, but they show you some of the sort of things I do. we're going to
But into
also go
that,
ahead, Amy. Yeah.
If it's something where it's like a formula, say you were doing something involving Fibonacci numbers, put in small values, check that they work. If it's a physics question, check that you're not traveling faster than the speed of light, or you haven't got a snail who's on a racetrack.
Or a particle going through another particle.
Yeah,
That's a
particles
good one.
crossing through other particles. You've got something hitting a wall and it's a tiny particle, but then the wall's moving. Just, consider they're not going to put in a mechanics question that is unlikely. If you've got probability, check that any probabilities are between 0 and 1. Check that you haven't got a negative probability. That's always a fun one. Little things like that, just sense checking your work, taking a step back and going, is this answer what I roughly intended to get? Like, estimation is a great thing. At the start of a question, you just put roughly what order of magnitude you expect your answer to be if it's numerical. Or you can check that your units match up if you're doing some big thing that involves SI units. That's always quite fun to go, does this make sense? Have I gone wrong somewhere and now have a nonsense answer? Like I once had that in Scotland, there was 4 schools to every child in a maths exam. That was great fun. Didn't spot that one.
I saw somebody who tweeted today about a GCSE question, which is about somebody who ran 2 kilometers in 2 minutes. What was that in miles per second? Which was a particularly good question. Just quickly pick up a question that's coming about blank pages. You can leave blank pages in the script. That's a really good idea, actually. So to leave a blank page or 2 after you finish a question in case you want to come back, it will still all get marked. And the other thing that markers can do is they can have a look at the whole script. If they think there's a page is missing, they can expand the whole script and just check through to find the missing page. I'm going to wrap up there unless there's anything else mentors want to. I've just seen another couple of questions that come in, but we'll wrap up there. Any questions that you really need an answer to, do feel free to email me. If you are in the UK at a state school and you have a step offer from Cambridge, you should be getting an email within the next 3 weeks, let's say, to invite you to a series of webinars. For some reason, it always takes us forever to get these emails out. I'm not quite sure why, but have a look out for that email. When the emails go out, I will tweet about it as well. So follow the Step Support Programme on X, Twitter, whatever it is, or just check it regularly. And so that I can say, the emails have gone out, check your spam folder, because they always go, some people always find them in spam folders. Mentors, any last tips before people disappear?
Do lots of practice questions. Just don't bother timing them, but just keep working through them. You'll find that the questions start to follow a pattern, or you start to spot bits that you don't swap for. And don't immediately go to the mark scheme if you get stuck. If you get stuck, leave it at least a day. It's really frustrating, but your brain will be thinking about it subconsciously, and you might suddenly, you'll be brushing your teeth and you're like, oh, I've just solved this problem. And it really helps because that problem solving technique will get faster, and hopefully by the exams you'll find that it will come in 10 minutes rather than 10 hours. And good luck, like they are hard, but it is really fun to do lots of maths, and it's really satisfying when you solve the problems.
So good luck, everybody. Hopefully we'll see some of you on the other side of these Zoom calls next year. Enjoy doing your maths and good luck. So let's go for, if there's a topic that I consistently struggle with on STEP, should I try to avoid it or prepare for it more? What do our mentors think? I have an answer to this one.
Well in advance of the exam, I'd definitely try and prepare as much as you can, see if you can figure it out, because you might find that the questions all follow the same pattern. And if you can learn that pattern, you might still be able to get very high marks or not fully understanding. But if sort of 2-3 weeks before the exams, you're still not getting it, then just cut that topic out. If it's just one topic out of all of them, it's very unlikely that a topic's going to come up more than once on a paper, unless it's calculus, when it'll be more than twice on a paper. So yeah, just try to work on it, but if it gets to like 2 weeks and you're still stuck, then cut your losses and work on what's going to get you the marks.
Yeah, my example for this question, because I get asked it a lot, is vectors. So lots of people don't like vector questions on STEP. If you come to Cambridge, you'll find that in the first year, 25% of your courses have the word vectors in the title. So you will have to do some vectors at Cambridge, and working through vector questions in STEP is a good way to help prepare for that. I don't care whether or not you do the vector question in the real exam. You do the questions in the real exam that suit you, but I would work through some vectors questions now because it's going to help you wherever you do maths. Does anyone else have anything to add on that one?
I'd like totally agree. Pretty much. It's yeah, definitely give it a go. And I think that one thing that you may kind of not want to hear is that you could actually end up really enjoying it. And if it's subjects that you've like avoided, there's a chance that if you give it a go and you allow yourself to just get stuck for a while, then you could really enjoy it. But also that kind of journey of discovery is best done in advance. And if you're getting to that point right before the exams, it's worth just getting a plan, nailing your exam technique.
Somebody asked, what does it mean to be an offer holder? An offer holder means that you've applied to Cambridge and Cambridge have given you an offer to do maths or possibly something else at Cambridge. So you will have applied to Cambridge, had an interview, and then they say, yes, you can come to Cambridge if you get these grades. Somebody asked, what are my chances of getting accepted through the August reconsideration pool if I meet the offer requirements? So for those people who don't know, the August reconsideration pool is a scheme where if you were given an interview at Cambridge, but you didn't get an offer, you meet certain widening participation characteristics, and then you meet the offer, the standard Cambridge offer, then there's a very good chance it will be found a place. There's more information on the Cambridge website, so have a look at that. If you have met the offer requirements, then you've got a very good chance of getting a place if you have been told about the August reconsideration pool, basically. Let's have a look at some of the live questions. So Amy, I think you wanted to answer one of them and I can't find it.
Oh yeah, it was extra time, which I know you can apply for, and then it was purple paper. I just wanted you to answer that one.
Yeah, so extra time you apply for under access arrangements. So your and purple paper and anything like that. The exams officer for your school should know exactly how to do that. If they don't know, then they can contact OCR and find out. But all the sorts of standard ways of doing this apply for STEP as well as other exams. Somebody said, should I sit the STEP before the conditional offer or after? People normally sit STEP after they've got their offer. So every year there are some people who sit STEP early, which is fine, but it's not by no means compulsory. And we also do not expect, we don't expect people to sit early, and the style of the questions is kind of designed for people who've gone through their entire sixth form. So you may find that if you sit STEP a year early, it's a bit of a demoralizing experience. So generally speaking, we don't recommend it. We're aware that some people do it, but normally it's afterwards. Someone's asked about schemes to help people pay for STEP. So STEP is not cheap, especially if centres put on additional fees. If it is if you are finding that an issue, my suggestion is to contact the college who's given you an offer and let them know that it's going to be difficult. So colleges at Cambridge deal with their own admissions. So speak to your college and see what some colleges have this all set up. Some colleges have it on a case-by-case person, but speak to them and see what they can do. Mentors, any other questions that I want to pick up on?
There's one about exam clashes. They're horrible. startup. I had step 3 and chemistry paper 2 on the same day. It wasn't fun. Basically, your school need to arrange it because you'll go into isolation between the 2 exams. You'll do one of them. So I did step first, then I spent lunch with an invigilator, not being allowed to talk to anyone, not having my phone, just having my paper resources to revise for chemistry, and then I did chemistry in the afternoon. It's really not ideal. One of my best top tips is when you finish the first exam, just forget all about it. Just don't ponder on it at all. Just like go, right, that's done, and focus solely on the second one, which was quite helpful for me because step 3 was horrible. So it was like, right, forget all about it and just focus on chemistry. Yeah, they're really not ideal, and it sounds like they're trying to reduce that by having the step 3 later this year. So hopefully you guys won't have that.
Yeah, it looks like Further Pure 2 is clashing, which is unfortunate. Step is normally in the morning. So we normally say, well, it depends where you are in the country. Sorry. In the UK, it depends where you are in the world. In the UK, step is in the morning, unless you have an exam clash, in which case you might be put into isolation, as Amy said. Around the world, it will depend a little bit. So hopefully that answers that question. Somebody's asked, will there be webinars for state school students run by Cambridge? Yes. We are in the process of trying to work out how to send out invitations. For some reason, it always takes much longer than I think it should. But you should, if you are at a UK state school and have a step offer for Cambridge, then we will be sending you an invite, let's say within the next 3 weeks. Hopefully it'll be sooner than that. For some reason, these things always take very long. So yes, but I will, when the invites go out, I will tweet about it to remind people to check their spam folders, because sometimes they end up in there. Somebody's asked about, oh no, this is a good one. Is it bad that I started step prep just a month ago? Would anyone like to expand on that, or just rather than just a general no?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting earlier is better, but I don't think starting a month ago is starting particularly late. There will be people who will be starting in a few months from now, and I would definitely not recommend that, but I think starting a month ago is fine.
There's somebody I know who's involved in outreach and step paper production, all these sorts of things. First time he ever sat a step paper was the one he actually sat for real. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a good idea, but starting now is absolutely fine. Somebody's asked about mark schemes. We get this question every year. Where can I find mark schemes for step before 2015? There are a couple of mark schemes for 2013, 2014 that you can find. There are a few other that you can find via somebody did a Freedom of Information request. There are a few others there. Basically, most of them pre-2015 have been lost or just were never saved. What I would do is not get too hung up about mark schemes for every single paper. A lot of the mark schemes are very scanty. They don't have a lot of detail in them. It's more important that you actually compare your solutions to somebody else's solution. So like the MEI solutions, that is more valuable than trying to work out how many marks you might have got. It's very hard to judge that. You've got 10 years of mark schemes. That's enough. When is a good time to start doing time papers? I don't think I ever did a time step paper, but I'll ask my mentors who have more recent experience. When do they think it's a good time to start doing time papers?
I started doing mine in the Easter holidays, which I think is about a good time to start doing it. Once you've covered most of the content and you feel confident that you do know what, and you've had some experience with the questions beforehand. One thing I will say about times papers, when I first did a few, I got to a point maybe an hour or so in where I just felt like I was making zero progress on every question. I just wanted to give up. Yeah, you probably will end up in that situation, and don't give up, because most of the time when that happened, I was able to eventually make some progress with some questions. But also because you need to, I think it's good to know what it feels like to just be completely stuck before you get to the actual exam, because if you're experiencing it for the first time in an exam, then that's going to be tough to deal with.
Amy or Henry, can you remember when you started doing time papers?
Yeah, I used to have a free on a Tuesday, and then the place where we studied in school was open till 5 p.m. So I'd sit in that room from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. It was about the end of this term, start of Easter term, that I'd do them just once a week. And then in the lead up to each exam, I did 2019, 2020, and 2021. I did all three of them timed in the 2 weeks leading up to each exam. Obviously around revising for A-levels as well. And they got easier. The first time I did it, I gave up after an hour and a half. Like Emma said, I wanted to cry, and I was in school, and it was like, this is so hard. And by the time you get to like the 2021 papers for us, which was the last one we could do, it was like, okay, I can make it to 3 hours. So it is just building up that stamina of being able to focus for that length of time. Especially if you have extra time and rest breaks. So I had them. So I was sat in the exam halls for absolutely ages, and it is a really big skill you need to learn. It's just to be able to keep your brain focused for that long.
One of the things you can do is in the middle of your exam, you can ask to go to the toilet and just get up, move out of the room, come back. You lose maybe 3 minutes of your exam time, but getting up, having a move around, what have you, can just help you to go splash some water on your face or something. Can just help you to then refocus. I don't do too many time papers is one of the things I'd say. I'd say probably 5 years of time papers is too many. I think maybe 2 or 3 years. The other thing that's very important, especially if you're using the really recent papers for time papers, which you should do, is that you do go back and look at the questions that you didn't do under timed conditions, because otherwise you're losing half of each recent paper you're just not considering. So do make sure you go back, but don't feel you have to do all 40 years of STEP as time papers. That is a bit ridiculous. Yeah, don't do too many.
I was going to say I
come.
started really late as well. I did about maybe 4 or 5 papers timed. But one thing you can do is, if you're anxious about it, is you can do half timed papers. You can start fairly early and you can time hour and a half.
Yeah, but like a lot of STEP preparation is actually about preparing for maths at university. So yes, there's this exam to pass as well, but also what you're doing is you're getting better at maths. We have overrun very slightly. I will answer a few more questions, but do feel free, if you're watching and you need to go off and do something, do. So somebody's asked about follow-through marks. We have a lot of method marks in STEP, and method marks by definition are for applying the method. So as long as your mistake hasn't made the question much easier, so for example, that you're now solving a linear equation rather than a cubic, the method marks might not apply. But in general, there are quite a lot of follow-through marks, mostly as method marks. Answer that question. Any questions anyone else wants to pick up on? Somebody's talked about time questions rather than time papers. Yes, you can do time questions, but then you've got to try, say, do a question in half an hour, which is a bit, I think 3 questions in an hour and a half is probably a better test than 1 question half an hour.
I timed some of mine, but didn't worry about finishing them in the time. It just, like, if you are curious, and then I timed each of 6 questions I did, like the first 6 I chose from a paper, and then added the times together. That was kind of helpful, but it's not quite as good because there was massive amounts of time between each question that my brain obviously had read the question and was thinking about it subconsciously.
Okay, let's just pick out a couple of. Somebody said, is it intended? Are we intended to learn material for probability mechanics? No. So the idea of giving probability and mechanics questions is that hopefully you should be able to do maybe the probability or the mechanics. We're not necessarily expecting everybody to be able to answer every question. So we try to put in a bit of a range so that people can go for something that they've covered. So we're not expecting people to learn masses of material. It might be that you want to just have a look up a bit of it because perhaps you only need to know a couple of things and then you can actually do some more questions. But have a look over the notes that we've got for those topics and decide whether or not you want to try doing those questions. But we're not intending people to learn masses of stuff. Okay, did any of my mentors have a flexible offer? No. Okay, that answers that question. So for those people who don't know, the flexible offer is you can either get 2 1s in STEP, 2 A stars and an A at A level, or you can get a 1 in either Step 2 or Step 3, but you must take both papers, which is very important, and then 3 A stars at A level. Okay, let's just do one last one. Somebody's asked about 2025 key dates. No idea when they're going to be released, I'm afraid. When they are released, I will tweet about it. I wouldn't expect it until September at the earliest. Last one. Should people prepare for Step 2 and 3 together, or focus on 2 and then move on to 3 nearer the time?
In terms of content-wise, like what you learn at A level, it is easier to do. Like Step 2 is based more on the first year of further maths, whereas Step 3 is on the second year. So purely in a practicing while you haven't learned all the content, you know, Step 2 might be more accessible. I started on Step 1 first, because by the end of year 12, you can pretty much do it. I mean, it depends how your school structures maths versus further maths when they teach it. But in terms of preparing for both of them, I think by the Easter term of year 13, you want to be preparing for both of them. Before that, yeah, maybe just focus on Step 2.
Especially if you're doing old, so pre-2019, Step 2 was based on A-level single maths. There shouldn't be any of the further maths stuff in there, but the questions will still be good. And don't be surprised if when you do your actual exams, you find that there are Step 3 questions which only rely on single A-level maths. Yeah, there's no guarantee there'll be complex numbers or hyperbolic functions or matrices. I mean, I expect at least one of those, but there's no guarantee that everything on the specs will be on the exam. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you very much to those people who've stayed for an extra 15 minutes. If you have any questions that have not been answered, then do feel free to email me. If you're from a UK state school, do expect that invitation to come out, hopefully fairly soon. And like I said, I'll tweet about it when I know that those invitations have gone out. They have to be sent from Cambridge admissions office, which is why it takes a bit longer. So thank you very much. Good luck with the STEP preparation and hopefully see some of you in Cambridge next year.